For all things health and fitness, this is the Army Gymnastics Podcast.
The Army Gymnastics Podcast.
Discover a fitter, healthier you at armygymnastics.com.
Welcome to the Army Gymnastics Podcast. Ever have those days or maybe weeks where you just feel off? Physically drained, maybe, but also mentally foggy, stressed out?
Oh, absolutely. That feeling of overwhelm, maybe your mood's just not right and you can't quite pin down why.
Yeah.
It's something a lot of us experience.
Exactly. And today we're diving deep into something that might be playing a role behind the scenes. The question is inflammation messing with your mind? We're going to find out how.
Yeah, and this isn't just, general wellness chat. We're looking specifically at the science, the research that connects inflammation in the body with what's happening in our heads, our mental well-being.
Right. We've gone through quite a bit of material, research articles on things like psychoneuroimmunology, bit of a mouthful there.
It is.
And studies on bipolar disorder, depression, the immune system itself, basically trying to pull out the key stuff for you.
Mm-hmm. The mission today is really to explore that dynamic relationship, how inflammation might influence mood, maybe even cognition, and what that understanding could mean for you listening.
Okay, so let's get started. You mentioned psychoneuroimmunology. That sounds important. What exactly is immunopsychiatry within that?
Right, so immunopsychiatry is a subfield really focused on that two-way street between the immune system and our mental health, how they influence each other.
Two-way street, okay.
Yeah, and, while the term might sound kind of new, scientists have actually been chipping away at these connections for, believe it or not, about 50 years now.
50 years, wow.
Oh.
Okay, so it's not brand new thinking then? What kind of links have they found over that time?
All sorts, really. Things like observing psychiatric reactions in patients getting cancer treatments. Those treatments massively impact the immune system, right?
Makes sense.
Also, how our emotions tie into how our immune system responds when we get sick. Even social stuff, how our interactions, our relationships connect to our immune biology.
Fascinating. And the big ones, like depression.
Definitely. The link between inflammation and depression has been a huge area of focus. And interestingly, on the flip side, some studies suggest things like psychotherapy might actually have anti-inflammatory effects.
So therapy could potentially cool down inflammation.
Potentially, yes. And early life adversity to tough experiences early on seem to be linked to how our bodies respond to stress with inflammation later in life. The big picture goal for immunopsychiatry is translating all this basic science into, actual clinical benefits for people.
That's really hopeful. But I remember reading in our sources about a challenge, a problem with how a lot of this research is done, something about timing.
Ah, yes, that's a critical point. A lot of the studies we have are either cross-sectional, like taking one snapshot in time, or they follow people, but the follow-ups are really spread out, maybe months or even years apart.
Right.
The thing is, stress, inflammation levels, mood, these things can fluctuate much faster. We're talking hours, days, weeks.
Checking every 6 months might miss the whole picture, like missing the daily ups and downs.
Exactly. If you want to figure out if A causes B or B causes A, you need to measure things much more frequently to capture those rapid dynamics. Imagine trying to understand sleep issues by only asking someone once every few months how they slept.
You'd miss everything important.
Pretty much. And meta-analyses, basically studies of studies, confirm this. Most of the longitudinal research on inflammation and depression has these long follow-up periods, 6 months or more. Very few look at the short-term ebb and flow.
Okay, that's a really important limitation to keep in mind. So let's assume inflammation is affecting the brain. How does it actually get there? How does inflammation from somewhere else in the body impact our thinking or mood?
That's the million-dollar question, and we're learning more all the time. So these immune signaling molecules, cytokines, are circulating in the blood. They can actually cross the blood-brain barrier.
That protective barrier around the brain.
Yeah. It's not fully understood how all of them get across, but there's evidence for active transport systems and also areas where the barrier might be a bit leaky, especially when inflammation is high.
Leaky. Okay.
And generally, the thinking is if cytokine levels are elevated in your blood, they're probably elevated in the cerebrospinal fluid that surrounds the brain too.
So the signals are definitely getting into the brain's environment.
Yes. And there's even newer research, mostly in animal models so far, suggesting lymphatic vessels within the brain itself might act as another direct pathway for these immune signals, like a drainage system that could also let things in.
Wow. Okay. So once these cytokines, these inflammatory signals are in the brain, what do they do? What are the effects?
Well, they can stir things up, They can alter the levels of key neurotransmitters, think serotonin, dopamine, the chemicals, crucial for mood regulation.
Right, the ones we hear about with depression.
Exactly. They can also cause the brain's own immune cells, the microglia, to become overactivated. Microglia have essential jobs, but when they're constantly switched on, it can become problematic.
Like immune cells going rogue in the brain.
Sort of, yeah. And this inflammation can also increase oxidative stress, which is like cellular damage caused by an imbalance.
So a cascade of negative effects, basically.
Pretty much. The overall result can be things like neurodegeneration damage or loss of neurons and reduced neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to adapt and form new connections. And this tends to hit areas important for mood and cognition.
Okay, that makes the connection clearer.
Yeah.
Now, where does stress fit into all this? We always hear stress is bad for us, mentally and physically. How does it interact with inflammation?
They're very tightly linked, especially through what's called the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. It's the body's main stress response system.
Right, the system that releases cortisol.
Precisely. And pro-inflammatory cytokines we mentioned, IFN, TNF-alpha, IL-6 before, can actually kick this HPA axis into overdrive.
So inflammation triggers the stress system.
It can, yeah. Now, short term, like if you have an infection, that's useful. The cortisol helps manage the situation. But the problem comes with chronic inflammation.
Long-term inflammation keeps the stress system constantly activated.
Exactly. That leads to prolonged HPA activation and chronically high cortisol levels, something called hypercortisolemia.
And having too much cortisol around all the time, that's bad.
It is. It can lead to problems like the receptors for cortisol in the brain becoming less sensitive or decreasing in number. These receptors are part of the negative feedback loop that tells the HPA axis to calm down.
So the off switch, it gets broken.
In a way, yes. The feedback loop gets disrupted, which can lead to even more cortisol production. It becomes a vicious cycle, impacting mood, thinking, sleep, and physical health, too.
That really paints a picture of how chronic inflammation could contribute to ongoing mental health struggles. Let's talk specifics. Bipolar disorder came up a lot in the research connecting to inflammation.
Yes, there's a pretty strong association there. Large studies show that people with bipolar disorder often have higher rates of other inflammatory conditions.
Like what kind of conditions?
Things like autoimmune disorders, chronic infections, cardiovascular disease, metabolic issues like diabetes, a whole cluster of conditions linked to inflammation.
That's quite a list. And what about the cytokine levels themselves in people with bipolar?
Studies generally indicate a state of chronic low-grade inflammation even when people are stable. But then during mood episodes, either depressive or manic phases, those inflammatory markers often increase even further.
So the inflammation levels seem to track with the mood swings.
It certainly looks that way.
Yeah.
And the proposed mechanisms are things we've touched on: cytokines affecting neurotransmitters, increased oxidative stress, those microglia getting overactivated, the HPA axis dysfunction,
Okay.
plus potentially alterations in the gut microbiome and how it talks to the brain, and even sleep-related immune changes. It's complex.
Definitely sounds like a web of factors. What about major depression? You mentioned earlier that it has maybe the most evidence linking it to the immune system.
That's right. The link between major depressive disorder and immune dysfunction is probably the most systematically studied and supported. There's even a specific theory, the macrophage theory of depression, basically suggesting cytokines directly cause changes in the brain leading to depression.
A direct cause. That's a strong claim. What kind of findings back that up?
Well, some longitudinal studies offer clues, though they can be complex to interpret. One study found young adults with higher depression scores initially actually showed lower levels of an inflammatory marker, CRP, 2 years later.
Lower. That seems counterintuitive.
It does, right? It might suggest the relationship changes over time or it depends on other factors. Another study, this one in college students over 2 years, found links between specific depressive symptoms like sleep problems, changes in activity levels, suicidal thoughts, and changes in specific inflammatory markers like CRP, TNF-alpha, and IL-1B.
So specific symptoms might correlate with specific inflammatory changes.
That's what it suggests. Interestingly, that study also found a kind of U-shaped curve initially, linking baseline depression to changes in IL-1B and TNF-alpha, but that pattern disappeared when they adjusted for other potential influencing factors. It just shows how careful researchers need to be.
It really highlights the complexity. Okay, so if inflammation is involved in these conditions, are people looking at anti-inflammatory treatments?
Absolutely. That's a major area of research right now, using anti-inflammatory agents to potentially treat bipolar disorder and depression.
Any front runners?
Yeah.
Anything looking particularly promising?
One agent that consistently comes up with decent evidence, especially for bipolar depression, is N-acetylcysteine, or NAC. It's often used as an add-on treatment, and trials suggest it can help reduce depression severity.
NSC, okay. What about things like ibuprofen or other NSAIDs?
The results there have been more mixed, honestly. Some early studies showed promise for bipolar depression or mania, but follow-ups haven't always confirmed it. There's also some interest in minocycline. It's actually an antibiotic, but it has anti-inflammatory properties too. Early trials for bipolar depression look somewhat promising, but we need bigger, better studies.
So it's not quite as simple as take an anti-inflammatory, fix depression.
Definitely not. While there's potential, especially maybe for people who have depression and a known inflammatory illness, we're still figuring out why these treatments might work. Is it directly affecting mood pathways, or is it just treating the underlying inflammation that was contributing to the mood problems? Lots more work needed there.
Understood. And does this inflammation connection go beyond just depression and bipolar?
Oh yes, the net seems to be widening. Research is linking immune-related proteins and processes to a whole range of other conditions.
Like what?
Schizophrenia, various anxiety disorders, Alzheimer's disease, even neurodevelopmental conditions like autism and ADHD. Scientists are identifying specific immune proteins that might become targets for future drugs across these different conditions.
That could really change how we approach mental health care across the board.
It really could. There's also research showing that children with persistently high inflammation levels seem to be at greater risk for serious mental health issues like depression or psychosis when they reach early adulthood.
That link starting early in life is quite striking.
It is, and it connects back to physical health, too. We know inflammation is involved in conditions like stroke, heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, even chronic sleep problems, and all of those conditions also increase the risk of developing depression. It just reinforces how linked the body and mind are.
It really breaks down that old idea of them being separate, and presumably our lifestyle choices factor into this inflammation picture.
Huge factor. The sources touched on this unhealthy lifestyles, meaning poor diet, lack of physical activity, chronic unmanaged stress, are linked to both higher inflammation and higher rates of depression.
So making positive lifestyle changes could be a key intervention.
It strongly suggests that, yes. Lifestyle changes could be powerful preventive tools, potentially tackling both the inflammation and the mental health risk factors simultaneously.
Okay, one last concept that came up was the social signal transduction theory of depression. Can you unpack that a bit? This sounds intriguing.
Yeah, it's a really interesting model trying to connect our social world to our biology. The basic idea is that negative social experiences, things like conflict, feeling isolated, being rejected or excluded by others.
Social pain.
Exactly. The theory proposes that the brain processes this social pain in areas that overlap with physical pain perception, like the anterior insula and the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex.
Okay.
Activation of these areas then triggers the HPA axis, or stress system, again, and also the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response.
Right. Leading to hormone release.
Yes, hormones like cortisol, but also epinephrine and norepinephrine, adrenaline and noradrenaline. And here's the link. While cortisol can sometimes suppress inflammation, epinephrine and norepinephrine actually tend to promote it. They activate pathways that increase the production of those pro-inflammatory cytokines we keep mentioning.
So social stress can directly ramp up inflammation via these stress hormones.
That's the theory. And then, as we've discussed, those elevated cytokines can circle back and contribute to inducing depressive symptoms, low mood, fatigue, social withdrawal, the whole cluster.
That's a fascinating pathway, linking social experience right down to cellular inflammation and mood.
It really is. So, wrapping things up, the big takeaway from this deep dive is that inflammation and our mental state are, well, they're intricately connected. It's not a simple one-to-one thing, but there are complex biological pathways linking them.
Definitely. And while, the science is still evolving, just understanding this connection opens up new ways of thinking about mental health, maybe even new avenues for treatment down the line.
For sure. And it's not about saying inflammation is the cause for any individual listening, but it encourages us to consider our overall physical health, our lifestyle, that inflammation backdrop as part of the bigger picture of our mental well-being.
It's a perspective shift, really, and definitely a field to keep an eye on as it's moving so fast. Always good to stay informed from reliable sources.
Absolutely. And remember, for expert fitness advice and personalized plans, visit armygymnastics.com, your go-to resource to reach your goals. Start your journey today at armygymnastics.com.
Thanks for listening. For all things health and fitness, subscribe to our newsletter today. Find out more at armygymnastics.com.